Good afternoon. I'd like to convene this special meeting of the Board of Commissioners on Monday, May 6th, and recognize Michelle Lancaster, Deputy County Manager, to introduce the presentation on capital improvement.
Thank you, Chairman Helms, board members. Chris Boyd, our Facilities Director, is going to walk you through our facilities renewal strategy. You'll remember most of this from a previous workshop where Chris talked to you about the strategy that we wanted to undertake as we were building our FY20 budget in terms of capital projects. Today he's going to go over some of those details again, but also show you the numbers, and you have some large sheets of paper in front of you that are the actual project numbers that go behind the plan that we're going to include in our FY20 budget. Following Chris's recap and project detail discussion, I'm going to provide you with the actual numbers that we plan to use in the manager's recommended budget, and also provide an overview of our major capital project plans. So what you're going to see from Chris is our R&R and our smaller dollar capital plan. So Chris, I'll let you have it from there.
I'm good. Thanks, Michelle. So as Michelle mentioned, there are two handouts, and I'll reference those as we're going through the presentation. The first is this one that's called the project priority and scoring sheet, and then the second is the unified capital project priority and sequence sheet. The one that we'll reference most is the bigger one with the smaller item, right? So I'll go through this, and as Michelle said, you'll remember several weeks ago I had the opportunity to present our overall strategy with no numbers. Okay, so we're bringing numbers this time. And to give you a sense, I did want to go back through some of our strategies real quickly again. So this model is designed to accomplish several things. The first is reduce our deferred maintenance backlog, then reduce and or eliminate any future growth of deferred maintenance. Of course, improve our facility condition index, which is the ratio of need to current replacement value. Also support projects that are needed for program improvements, which can include growth and space need projects. But one of the most important things is try to identify a consistent and sustainable level of investment for you all to consider. So the plan process, what it'll look like, kind of a 5-step process. The first is identify the facilities needs. Then we document those projects based on those needs, assign priorities, then assign those funding groups, and each of these bullets we'll get into a little bit more detail, and then finally develop the CIP. So in order to identify the facilities needs, which can be maintenance and repair projects, renovations, big and small, and any new facilities needs. We use facility condition assessments. One of the things I do want to point out is that we are going to enter into a project to do a more robust facility condition assessment this year that will better inform the plan in the coming years. Facilities management department worked most of the year on development of this equipment life cycle condition-based replacement plan. And then our department met with all other departments to identify space needs requests. We made some assessments based on that and did some analysis based on their request. And then in the future, we've got master plans that we've engaged in that can also inform some of the facilities needs. So the next step is document projects. So most importantly, what is the scope of each of these projects? One of the things I think we need to do a little bit better in is identifying site and land requirements for especially these new major capital projects that aren't sited or don't have any immediate land available. From that scope, developing estimates, and then thinking about the project justifications for each of the projects. That all informs some of our priorities. And the first sheet that you've got is our priority ranking system, and it's a formula-based approach. If you look at this section, which is UC concerns addressed, so each project will get points, and you can see the point totals at the top, 100, 80, 70, 60, all the way down. You can see the type of projects, life safety, health, security, business continuity, all those, you can kind of see this kind of a logical award of points, and also project type importance factors into the equation. And you can see again, kind of the highest priority are safety, security, building envelope, all the way down to aesthetics, which are kind of the least important projects. And so that's what we use to develop the general priorities, kind of first pass priorities. Then we look to reconcile those general priorities with any known county priorities. And that can be like some of our equipment-based plans. If we've got logistic issues, even though it may score really high, we've got logistic issues that force us to think about 2 years down the road as we may have to plan for more significant, like I'm thinking about an electrical project that may require us planning temporary generator, things like that. So logistics may push a high-scoring project down a couple of years. So we balance the general priorities with some of the known priorities. And then, once we do that, we get in front of you all so you can make some final judgments on the final priorities. This is a partial list, but you've got the full list. Just to give you an example, I'm going to skip over these projects that are already funded, but if you take a look at the main library, Board of Elections, addition and renovation, you can see it received points for, did receive points for life safety health, did on security, business continuity, life cycle replacements, regulatory statutory, energy, community impact, and current space shortage. And not these two because it received points here. So the formula, which we're trying to get at this priority quotient, is kind of its priority score. You add all those up and then divide it by the product of these two numbers. And so that ends up giving you your priority score for each of these projects. So the next step, once we got those priorities, is to assign them into what we're going to call these three funding buckets. The operation capital, facility repair and renovation, and major capital. Operation capital is usually those projects that are less than $100,000. Facilities repair and renovation are between 100 and 300, and then over 300 are our major capital projects. And as we're going through more specifically the projects in the plan, I'll show you a few examples of some of the projects in each of those categories, those two categories of operation capital and facility repair and renovation. So just another kind of, we got buckets, right? And it's kind of an easy way to kind of understand how we're developing this plan. Once we've finished with putting those projects in each of those funding buckets, then it's time to develop, that final capital improvement plan. We do that by distributing those three funding groups evenly as best we can back to the discussion about priorities and how a project may score high and it be deferred a year. Is kind of also based on some leveling and trying to get a consistent funding level over each year. Operation capital and facility repair and renovation are the easiest to do that level funding. The major capital, of course, are based on what's our debt capacity, what's available for major capital projects, those things. And so one of the things to remember about the plan is that the distribution's easily adapted based on what is available to fund it. And I think one of the most important things again is that investment requirement is identified in this plan. So you've got it up front and you know what it's going to take to fund this plan on an annual basis. So first look is at operations capital. This is a partial list, just to give you an example. You've got the full list, and that's the bigger sheet. A little harder to read because it is smaller items. but it's hard to get all this information on one sheet. And actually, the sheet goes on for, you know, a long ways more, but it's really just about cash flow and some scheduling, and it helps with us on workload. To take a look at each of these kind of columns, and since this is the first sheet, I'll go over each. So this FMD PID is just an internal FMD project number. This one. The group are just the 3 groups. Operations capital is this sheet. The next one will be FRR, facilities repair renovation, and the last one will be major capital. Now your sheet is actually sorted opposite, you know, because the major capital shows up first, then the facilities repair renovation, and then the operations capital.
Well, what page is that?
This one should be the second page. We're starting at the bottom of the first page.
At the bottom of the first page.
Let me see, and then put those in that page.
You got it?
Are you trying to confuse it?
No, I'm not, I swear I'm not. I swear I'm not. Okay, so operations capital is this group, then the year that it fits in the plan. 2020 is first year, then 2021. The sheet is sorted by this group and this year. Then a program code, which is basically a finance-driven code. I think they're going to be a little bit different than this. This is just an internal designation by facilities until we get an actual code, you know, to apply to them. Project ID, you won't see that on here because that's another funding code that finance uses or budget uses. And then a brief description of the project. The facility ID, what's the building number? We do a lot of, you know, reports on building number and things like that. That's an actual, we actually developed that this year. You know, applying, I think it's 1 through 51 or something, total number of facilities. Then it's priority score. This isn't necessarily that important for you all, but this is for us in trying to plan. Design start finish, duration, and construction start end, duration, and then just a summary of if you've got multiple funding sources that are going to apply to each of these projects, but these are all just one funding source. You'll see a lot of zeros in design. With these small projects, they don't require design work. So any questions on that sheet or the data on the sheets that you have in front of you on the operation capital?
All right,
Yes, sir.
the operation means stuff that needs repairs, right?
Yeah, it's really, it's maintenance, repairs, renovations, and some, you know, equipment replacements. Mostly in operation capital, anything that's $100,000 and less.
I'm sure, you know, sure I'll have a lot of questions. Like one thing, farmer market walk-in cooler replacement, $37,000. That's always just been an insulated room with 2 window air conditioners.
Yeah, well, they're kaput. We've got problems with them.
The window air conditioner?
Yes, and it's not adequate to do what it's supposed to be doing. And that's the request that we got from facilities, was to do a walk-in cooler. Okay?
The sheriff's office, is that, I understand there's some problems with the walls, is that on here?
Which one?
Any of the sheriff's office general repair and replacement?
Is that the current issue that we've got down? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
That's going to be funded with, there's some existing money in the facilities repair and renovation line, and we're going to look to fund that with that existing fund, so it's not in this list.
Question, please.
Yes, sir.
I see several things, and I clearly understand planning on replacement, you know, chillers or whatever. But do we have a process that evaluates, I mean, you anticipate in 10 years, I might have to replace my hallway. In 10 years, it may not need to be replaced. Do we have a process to evaluate that so we don't replace it just because
We do.
it's, okay? Okay.
Yeah, and the first step in that is we've got a facilities database that we, is part of our work order system. And it holds all of our equipment inventory, building equipment inventory. And each entry, for instance, a hot water heater, its installation date will be listed, its expected lifetime or life cycle will be a part of that. Its initial replacement will fit into this plan based on the 10 years or 15 years or whatever the standard is. Whenever it comes, basically the year before it's due, then we'll take a look at the condition. So that's a condition-based assessment at that point.
Okay.
It's based on life cycle first, then every year we'll evaluate each piece of equipment that's up for replacement in the year and the next, and determine based on its condition whether or not it gets deferred. And actually that won't be deferred, that will be moved to another year or later. And so that's our process for dealing with that.
Does
That's on the general
UCP,
government side, not on the public works side. Like pump replacement, earlier.
Yeah.
But it
and-
made me think about this
Yeah,
scenario
exactly.
too, because.
Yeah, you certainly, equipment manufacturers recommend, a roof in 20 years. Actually, we got good roofs in Union County, actually. So you won't see many roof things on here. But 20 years for a roof, all right? Well, we'll make a condition assessment as it starts getting closer to funding. And because we understand that sometimes there's not a need to do something just because a year says it has to be done.
Okay.
where are these UCPS,
Public school?
no, which buildings are those? The central office?
Just one, the central office. All right,
They
and,
probably wanna
I
do-
knew we owned that one and I furnished it for them.
yeah, well, I've got a few pictures, that kind of demonstrate some of the projects and what they look like, and I think they moved to the next. So this is basically one of the projects. This is replace HVAC systems at the old post office. Those units are, what I'm gonna say is past their useful life because they are, their condition warrants their replacement now. We've got some reliability issues with those, and we do take a look at kind of work order history and, make some assessments based on that and how often we're having to replace those. We aren't advanced enough to take a look at overall life cycle cost at this point, but we will get there at some point. So we make a determination of whether the first cost to replace it, should we be spending $500 a year for the next 6 years versus replacing it, that kind of analysis. So we're not there yet, but we will be.
Is the new work order system that you have requested, that gives you the ability to track that cost of repair over time?
It will allow, position us so that we will have all that easily accessible versus having to, dig through purchase orders or other things, but we can actually attach cost in that new work order system if we get it to help make those decisions. All right, so this is one project, multiply that by
Besides
two. Yeah,
CTE, what else is in the old post office?
say that again, I couldn't hear.
Besides career and technical education?
Our
Veteran
veteran
services.
services.
Yeah.
Very important building.
Oh, but I know, but it's a hard building to access.
Yeah, it is. And there are other needs in that building, but this is just one example that I want to show. Multiply that by two of those units. Those are outside, that's an outside conditioning unit. Inside there's a air handling unit that feeds, that unit feeds that air handler. So times two. And that project replaces both, $40,000.
That's both.
For how
That's
many
about right.
systems?
Two.
New center blocks
Outside
on that.
unit and inside unit constitutes one system.
I know. How many ton unit is that?
Oh, that's a small, it's 2.5 tons maybe.
And that's all we replace? One, two?
Two of those. 2 outside conditioned units and 2 inside air handling units. The inside air handling units are the more difficult, to replace. They're just, a little harder on space, and that old building's just more difficult take things in and out,
So we're talking about $40,000 for about 5 tons of air conditioning.
just about.
And a new cinder block.
Huh?
And a new cinder block.
Yeah, and cinder block and water hose. Actually, I think they were, when I asked them to take the pictures, they were doing some maintenance on the unit, so anyway, that's why you see water hose, and they're probably sitting on that block to do something. Anyway, okay, next one. All right, this is a generator at public schools. That generator is, I think it's 32 years old, maybe. While it's not, it's only for life safety egress systems. It's not full backup to the building. It's a small generator. As you can see from the $30,000 number, it's not a large generator. But you can see the condition of that generator. We test it monthly and do repairs on it frequently. And
Because it's a Ford?
well, maybe. That's what
Maybe
it says
so.
right there. I know, maybe so. I'm not gonna say, I drive a Ford, so I can't say that. Anyway, so that's a project that needs to happen fairly soon. You can see it's year 2022. It's actually got a pretty high priority score, but based on where we think it should fall, back to your point of, should it be replaced now or can it wait? Well, we've just invested a little bit in it, so we think we can wait, a couple of years on it.
Mark, that generator y'all got down at Waxhaw, is that,
That's huge, that's the size of this room.
we can run?
That could be, that Public Works would be removing that. We still have some discussions to be had about where that's relocated, but we do have a need at the jail for one that size.
And actually, you'll see the jail in the major capital list, that generator, because there's actually got to be some modifications to the electrical system that bumps it up a lot, based on the size of the generator. It needs to be increased. And there's a lot of electrical work that's associated with increasing the generator size. Another is carpet. We got a lot of carpet that needs to be replaced, in Union County, unfortunately. And it's hard in pictures to see the condition of carpet, but that carpet is not in good shape. This is over at Patton Avenue, the transportation building, the office portion. Fairly significant amount of carpet, in that building. It is difficult to see, but it's in pretty bad shape. Anybody been over transportation?
I have.
What's it like?
It's rough.
It's rough, all right.
Chris, that's most economical floor surface for a government building,
It's carpet.
carpet
Yeah.
versus linoleum or something like that.
I would say that depends on the area.
Yeah,
Like here, we need carpet. I mean, it's, for acoustics, for other things.
right.
It's more appropriate. But potentially in corridors, we look at some harder surfaces, whether it's, one of the growing trends is luxury vinyl tile, which is basically stick down stuff, and it's pretty hardy, not a lot of, less maintenance. Like VCT, which is kind of the old standard, you got to do a lot of waxing, you got to do a lot of maintenance on those, and this LVT, you don't have to do as much. You just got to mop it occasionally. So, and there will be, in this case, some opportunity to do some hard surface versus carpet in some of these areas. All right, so to give you a sense of what that looks like in the operations capital bucket, over a 5-year period, you can see it's a pretty level funding amount per year. The total over that 5 years, $2.69 million, and the average is about a little over $500,000 in the operations capital bucket. All right, any more questions about OC, operations capital? Nope. All right. So we'll move on to facilities repair and renovation. So projects start getting a little bigger each step you take. So this is the $100,000 to $300,000 project. Again, the same, this is just a portion of your sheet, so I'm not going to go over the listing of what the headers are. But I'll go to some more pictures. All right, this is the old courthouse, the flooring over the old courthouse. It's old battleship linoleum. We want to consider restoring back to the hardwood floor that's underneath that. And we don't know that's feasible yet, but if we went back with another hard surface, then we're looking at about $100,000 to do that whole area.
Is there work that's gonna be done on the ceilings or anything before that?
Not in this, but in the major capital, you'll see phase 3 of the courthouse renovation.
Or would you wait till after you did some of the other work before you replace the floor?
Well, we're trying to use that more frequently for meetings, events, and we probably need to take a look at that now. Do something that's appropriate. If we go back to the wood flooring, then that's going to be appropriate even when you do the renovation.
Yeah, but I was raised, you start at the top and work down.
Well, we are starting at the top. This is one exception to the rule, I would say, is that we're, it's the thing that's immediately an issue. It's going to become trip hazards in there if we don't do something with the flooring.
And it already is in some cases. You got some of that linoleum's really coming up on the edges and creating
And
some of those safety issues.
But I guess the point is, what's the time span that we're talking, if we replace this hardwood floor and we don't fix the roof, and we get damage to it,
okay,
what's the time span between the two?
well, we do have phase 1 that's in progress right now, which is the roof
Okay?
and the building envelope. So that's in design now. It should go out in the bid in the next couple of weeks. So we're working on that to get the building dry. And then the next phase is going to be kind of a major renovation,
Okay.
to the facility. But this is a short term because it's becoming more visible, used more by the county because, the building's been sitting there for, a pretty good long time. And now that we want to use it, we've got to make some repairs to this space in order to make it, acceptable, remove some of the safety issues and safety hazards. And we think that, and you'll see miscellaneous repairs. There are some other, things, lighting. We got some plaster issues, not fully fixing the plaster in the courtroom, but some plaster repairs. And throughout actually some of the other spaces. If we're going to use some, right now we've moved in, people into 3 offices in the first floor. If we plan to use it more frequently or more permanently, then we need to make some repairs, and that's what some of these funds will do too.
That includes the miscellaneous and the floor.
It does, miscellaneous and the floor. All right, next on the list is Agriculture Center. We replaced 4 units recently because we had to, back to the point of deferred maintenance and how it costs us. And when we don't do it in a planned approach, we had this year to start a heating season, we asked our staff to go and do assessments of our heat exchangers on gas packs because they become, if they're cracked, they become a carbon monoxide issue. And we found 7, that were cracked. We had to shut them down, get them repaired. Actually, I think it was 3 of them that actually were in the heating season before we got fully in the heating season before we got those things fixed, but we couldn't run them, until we got them fixed. This is an extension of that. And you can see based on when they were supposed to be replaced and their condition, we certainly recommend that these 4 units down at Ag Center get replaced in 2020. Next is Carpet Judicial Center. Again, it's RC carpet, but it's in bad shape. It needs to be replaced. It's one of our, other than Human Services, one of our highest traffic buildings, and needs to be done. It's a significant amount of carpet, in that facility, and that's why you see the cost of $275. But back to, can we use some hard? Maybe we can use some hard surfaces in some of these areas so that we won't have to do this in 7 years when kind of typical carpet replacement in high traffic areas. Then the last facility repair renovation or switchgear down in this building, the main service for this facility. This is on the list. It's becoming more and more difficult when we've got any issues with that switchgear, to find parts. We certainly want to, and if some of you don't work here in, Monroe maybe, and Monroe Power is notorious for, blips in power. And oftentimes when it does that, we've got, some control issues, or potentially sometimes we see some issues with some of our switchgear, whether they've tripped or we've got, issues like that.
That's vintage 1972.
Vintage 1972. Now, electrical switchgear lasts a long time, and that's why it's, still there. But it is time to upgrade, given, the critical nature of this facility. I don't feel really comfortable with where we stand with, our electrical infrastructure. But it is 2 years out, 2022, before we plan to fund that. All right, so a summary of what that looks like. You can see again, it's a pretty level, consistent level throughout the 5-year total. You can see it's a little over 5.6 or almost $5.7 million over 5 years, and an average of $1.1 million over those, or $1.2 million, around $1.2 million over those 5 years. All right, any questions on the facility repair and renovations?
Does your estimates include an escalation in cost of doing repairs in the later years?
They do not at this point, and that's part of our improvement over as we're moving forward this year. Depending on how this all works out, what kind of the funding level looks like, how this gets adjusted, then we'll look to try to improve it next year, just along with some facility condition assessments, to inform this a little better, so that it's just not, our internal, group. So you'll have some outside people that are giving some ideas and advice on, what needs to be replaced.
So annually, Chris, we'll relook at this
We
and
will.
improve the numbers.
So next year, we'll come back with, this plan again, modified, adjusted, new projects will roll in, that are, in 2025. Projects will start rolling in next year, this request next year. Okay, so now we're gonna go to the major capital, which Michelle's gonna take
Can
over.
I say one thing about
Yes.
this process? I really like this process for a couple of reasons. One, because it actually identifies and ranks in order these projects, but also provides us a methodology for somewhat level funding over time. But one thing I'd like for you to consider, we move forward into next year is, I know we're always looking forward, 5 years, but to actually report on, what has been accomplished in the current year,
Okay.
so that we can see what was done and then what is yet to be done, but it allows folks to know and understand what has been accomplished. Because there may be some things that get pushed from, current year to next year, but to see exactly what's been accomplished, I think would be helpful.
I think so. Yeah, I think justification for this plan, is another part of that. Did we do what we say we were gonna do, and what did change? Because there are emerging priorities, every week, every month, that we have to make some adjustments, to our plan. So that's a very good point. We'll do that. All right.
Okay, so I'm actually gonna talk about money, the real money, before I get into major capital. So as you can see from Chris's list, and I would echo the words that Mark just said, we've spent some time on this, spent some time with the finance staff, and I think we feel like as an organization we're in a much better place than we've probably been in quite some time in terms of looking at our facilities and the investment that we need to make. But the list is always gonna be longer than the amount of money that we have to spend. So in working with finance, the money that we are including in the manager's recommended budget for operating capital right now, and we are finalizing the budget over the next week, is $550,000 annually. So that 5-year look that Chris was talking about. And then for the R&R, $1.2 million is what we are building into our budget in terms of how much we would invest on an annual basis. So that aligns with really the averages that Chris provided, realizing that there'll be emergencies and other things. But we think that's a good, sustainable amount that we can live with in our budget. So any questions about that before I move to major capital? So major capital's, a little trickier for a variety of reasons. The biggest is that this is really where we have to start looking at what our debt capacity is when you start getting over $300,000 projects. And as you can see from some of these, much larger in the multi-millions of dollars anticipated to spend. And so this list is our major capital list, which you have in front of you. This has not been given as much attention as the smaller projects for a variety of reasons. This list has kind of progressed over the last several years and has just been kind of languishing out there, if you will. We've done some of the large projects that we could, that we had available funding for, like the Human Services Campus, the bond-funded projects, and then you've got just a whole litany of things that make the rest of this list. So what we have done is kind of gone back and looked at what we think we can sustain over the next year in terms of priorities when you look at the work that Chris has done, and what we anticipate including in our next year's budget. And this, again, gives you the top 10 items. As Chris mentioned, the one that scored the highest is the Board of Elections expansion and renovation. I think many of you have been there, seen that space. This is one that we invested some money in current year to do an assessment to look at what we needed to invest in that space. And then you can see next is door controls and wedge locks for the jail. This is something that's been out there for a bit. We know we've got to do, we've got to take care of that. And the items, this is the number, so $121.5 million worth of items that you have in your major capital list right now, that again, we haven't done an extensive look. Where should those priorities be? So what we've done in terms of next steps that we wanted to share with you today is we think that these three projects are the projects that we have capacity to start in FY20. The Board of Elections expansion and renovation at a price tag of somewhere between $4.5 and $5 million is the estimate. The jail door controls and wedge locks at $850,000, and the livestock arena kind of scaled down pole barn version at about $2 million. And Jeff and Beverly and their staff have looked at how we can accommodate that financially in building our budget. And then what we would like to do is come back to you in the fall, October, November timeframe with a more robust major capital process, some way for us to prioritize what these are, because we just don't have a process currently. We have the scoring that Chris can do, but we need a process that we can weigh into and that the board can weigh into for some of these really big ticket items and identifying what we want to spend those big dollars on going into the future. And so that is what we want to leave you with today, and I'm happy to answer any
Can you back
questions.
up one?
Sure.
Now that
Oh, sorry.
is excluding bonds, bond-funded projects.
No, it has the ones that have been approved already in that list. So you've got your library, your 911, those
Well,
are
I
in
knew
there.
that, but I mean, that 5-year average, that
Yes,
didn't include the bond money, does it?
it does, it's all in there, yes.
Okay, so that makes it a little more manageable.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. So with that, we'll plan to bring that back to you. Do you have any feedback on major capital? Or on the dollar amounts that we're using since we're finalizing the budget? If we're out of whack on that, today would be a really good day to tell us. And that's the 550 and the 1.2 million.
I guess I'd like a 2-on-1 to review the scoring process.
Okay. We can do that.
You know, if something's just 2 or 3 little points out of the thing.
Mr. Wright, what we're trying to accomplish this year is, one, live within our means, but actually start checking off some of these items off the list. I think this, whether we get together for a day down at the lake at Cane Creek like we did earlier this year and spend a day on this and talk about rank ordering and how we prioritize and what are the board's priorities, and then how is the organization going to rank these going forward, so we do have a process.
Well, the biggest thing I want is I just want to understand what I'm voting to approve.
Gotcha.
So I think you're talking about just the ranking overall for operational capital and repair and replacement.
I just, you know, something that's like a smaller setting.
Okay, we can do that.
So Michelle, we're talking about 9.5 million all encompassing for capital. That's this plus the other two phases, the other two buckets, so to
Yes.
speak.
Mhm.
And I agree with Mark. Do we know what that figure was last year in terms of capital pay-go money?
Now, Jeff, do you know off the top of your head?
It wasn't near that. It was a couple, 2.5 million, I think, in that neighborhood.
How much?
2.5 million. I
Okay.
believe.
Yeah, this is significant, and we realize that. I mean, we've spent a lot of time looking at this. I mean, we really charged Chris with telling us what we need to invest, again, knowing that that list is always gonna be longer than what we've got available, but if we're not proactive, it's gonna cost us more later. And we don't wanna get in that situation.
And keep in mind, Commissioner, these projects, the major projects, not all of those are funded with pay-go money out of the general fund. So the Board of Elections, for instance, is additional 2/3 capacity that we had left when we did the economic development project.
Okay.
So that's not all, you asked about pay-go, to be fair. This isn't all pay-go either. The Board of Elections is gonna be new debt.
I'm just trying to compare apples to apples
Absolutely.
as
That's why I just wanted to be sure.
It's still a fairly significant
It is.
Sure.
investment over current year.
Well, I applaud you for taking the steps. I think it's a critical need for this county, and it certainly has removed a lot of the subjectivity that has existed in prior years in trying to identify where we needed to expend our funds, and so I think you've done a tremendous job in this work, so thank you.
Thanks.
I
Chris, for that.
agree, staff's
Absolutely.
done a good job at doing that. I think we'll see the process get even better.
Okay. Go right into our next item.
Okay, for our second item on the work agenda, I'd like to recognize Jeff Yates, Financial Service Administrator, to present the updated FY 2019 year-end project projection.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So today, we want to just update on year-end projections. As you know, we try to come back to you during this time of year on a monthly basis. So today, I want to talk about where we are through the end of March, which is our last completed month. We'll know in about another week or so where we are for the end of April. But what we'll see in just a second is we're right on target. So our year is progressing as we would anticipate. So that's the good news, is nothing's abnormal, nothing's out of whack. So we'll talk about our revenues and our expenditures. And I'll point out a couple of important things, and I'll give you kind of a projected fund balance at the end of 2020 when we get there. So where are we with our revenues? This is pretty much what you saw at the end of February. We're right on track, but I want to point out the center fund transfers line that I have blocked out here. This is, you remember we did our debt redemption and we brought 5.8 million in. I'm sorry, we budgeted fund balance of 5.8 million. Well, that's part of that interfund transfer revenue, and I'll show you the other side of that transaction. But that's really the big change we've had in our projected 2019 from the last time you saw this. Our ad valorem is trending to meet the revised estimates, but not significantly more. You can see the revised, we're right on track where we would expect to be, which puts us just a little bit behind where we've been historically. That means Van and his folks are reaching terminal velocity in their collection rate. So we cleared out a lot of that old stuff we collected historically where we've been 1%, 2%, 3% over. We're right on pace then to be where we budgeted, just slightly less. So that's pretty much dead on. Local option sales tax, you can see as we've been talking about, we were really aggressive in our 2019 number. So we're trailing significantly there. And that will impact not only the general fund but it impacts the fire service funds as well. So when we get to the budget and we talk about budgeting for fire, what you'll see in that case is that in some of those funds, they don't have fund balance to use like they have in the past, because that shortage in sales tax is going to be felt also in those funds, and we pay them out based on their appropriation. So instead of getting what's actually collected, they get what our appropriated amount is. So that offset of that over collection on revenue in those same funds will be slightly diminished by a shortage in sales tax. So what we've done right now, our working budget estimate for 2020 is to hold that number flat and grow into it, which we think we'll do eventually. Our other revenues are coming in just as expected, which is good. That's where we want to be. So you can see we have budgeted about 169, and this is without fund balance usage. We're projecting to come in just around 168, which is positive. So on the expenditure side, we are looking to be just slightly less than budgeted on compensation and benefits, which we would expect through attrition and so forth. Actually, benefits is up just a little, but you can see in salary will offset that. Our operating expenditures, as would be anticipated, are slightly behind. The big note here is you can see the change in, or actually you can see the revised budget in debt. That number is now 52 million. That number was around 43 before we did that debt redemption. So you're seeing the fruition of the budgeting for that debt, and of course interfund transfers and so forth. So the good news is we're trending to be about where we would expect. You can expect with attrition anywhere between 95% of budget being expended, 93, 95%. So all of these to say, both of these projections tell us we are right on track where we would expect to be. So when you put those against each other, if you look at line 4, we are expecting to use about $7.7 million of fund balance in this year. The biggest chunk of that is that debt redemption. We had budgeted to use about $10 million. In total before the debt redemption, the total budget's about $14 million. So about half of what we anticipate using in fund balance, which is good. So when we run that through our calculation, and the way this will work is our estimated, our general fund balance at the end of 2018, based on our estimates, plus our committed reserve gives us total position, less used, which is what the projected for 2019 is. This number is our working reserve number for next year, about 60 million. So that's based on our current working budget, so that'll change as we go on. Gives us our leftover estimated use available of about 7.3. We have about $2.5 million that we will anticipate rolling with encumbrances, one-time expenditures, and so forth. And that's an important number because as we go to balance the budget, one of the strategies that we always use to keep next year's tax rate either at where it needs to be for to keep it level is we try to pull out the one-time items out of next year's budget request and go ahead and use additional capacity from this year to cover those so we don't have those in the next year. So about $1 million of that $2.5 million is anticipated for those one-time items and rolls. And that's no different than in past years. It's been between $1.5 to $2.5 million. So with where we are right now, this is just an estimate. We'll tighten up. Notice we have no money going right now as one-time money to the general fund out of the fund balance. In the past years, this has been anywhere between $1 million to $3 million. Usage for contingent items. Right now, we have about $1 million planned for FY 2020. This is for economic development incentives that may or may not come to fruition. So this is just a balancing number, which we historically used. So at the end of 2020, June 30, 2020, we would expect to be right around 3.7 million in additional fund balance above reserve level. That number will tighten up as we finish the budget, as we have the year going on, but this isn't always a projection that we try to do to kind of ensure that our 2020 budget is sustainable and that we are kind of going to not tap that out by the end of the year, and we want to be sure of that. Commissioner Wright, do you have a question? Okay, you just look like you had a thought. Okay. So this is kind of where we anticipate ending up right now. The meaningful number for the purposes of 2019 is that $7.7 million. It looks like a big number, keeping in mind that number is budgeted at about 14. So we're having a good year from a revenue perspective and a good year from the expenditure perspective, as we would anticipate. So this year's not unlike any other it's right on track with what we have been historically. So with that, again, we'll come back probably around the time of the budget and update these numbers for you again, because we'll have the close of April. Our sales tax continues to be an area we monitor, and then ad valorem base right now is about set. So we're fairly comfortable with what our penny value is for for next year. It's about 2.7, just over $2.7 million. It's the same number that the schools use in their calculation and so forth. So we feel pretty confident that we've got this part of the budget nailed down for going into the next year, and then we're ready for that discussion and working with Mark and getting the budget balanced. So is there any questions? So I'll turn that back to you guys.
Ready to go into closed session? Okay. I move that we recess and go into our special meeting to reconvene at 5 o'clock and in the first floor conference room. All in favor? Aye.